I'm going to touch on school safety, both with the new acts and also the school safety provisions contained in the LEARNS Act. I'm sure you're all aware as school board members that you should have policies in place to dissuade bullying. And also, something you may not be aware of is that your superintendent is required annually to report the number of bullying incidents at your schools and also the actions taken regarding those reported incidents. That report is to be done in public and annually. Act 101 requires school districts and charter schools to provide information on water safety education courses and also the importance of swimming lessons. Act 165 amends the authorization for parents and school employees to use physical force against a minor or an incompetent person under their supervision. Now limits the justification for that use of physical force in circumstances in which they sense imminent physical harm. Act 286 requires public and private schools to have at least 2 employees who have met the training requirements to administer or assist with seizure medication and to recognize the signs and symptoms of seizures. Act 290 establishes Mental Health Awareness Week for the first full week of school in May in all public schools. Act 420 expands what constitutes an abuse of an athletic contest official. Now includes intentionally causing serious physical injury, and that is classified as a Class B felony. Act 426 requires public schools to admit international exchange students. It also provides the school district the ability to quarantine those exchange students if they feel the need to, and also provides provisions to expel and or suspend those students under certain circumstances. Act 504 requires all public entities to create a technology resource policy, defining the authorized use of technology resources for that public entity, and also to develop a cybersecurity policy for all tech resources. Act 642 requires any association that sponsors sports training or high-risk youth athletic activities for children who are under the age of 14 or younger to require all coaches and athletic personnel to complete an annual injury mitigation course. There's a couple of exceptions in Act 642. Act 737 requires an automated external defibrillator to be placed at each school-sponsored sporting events for grades 7 through 12. Act 754 requires each LEA to ensure that all contracts that disclose student personally identifiable information to third-party vendors include express provisions in that contract to require that third-party vendor to put protections and safeguards in place that the district has to protect that information. Act 787 requires all public and private schools to keep all exterior doors closed and locked during school hours with the exception of transition times and to refrain from impeding egress during a fire drill. Act 788 prohibits a public school from discriminating against a student based on an expressed religious viewpoint or prohibits the public school district from penalizing or rewarding a student based on the religious content of an assignment. Act 792 requires registered volunteers who are in the process of obtaining a coaching certificate or who will be working with students in an athletic coaching capacity to apply for a statewide and nationwide criminal records check. Act 811 requires DESE and the Department of Health to ensure that all public schools have an overdose rescue kit. I'm guessing they're talking about Narcan there. Act 871 is an appropriations act. You heard me talk to y'all last year about the report on the School Safety Commission. This Act 871 provides $50 million for those school safety grants. Commissioner's Memo 23068 sets out everything you need to know from the application for those school safety grants. It also contains a copy of the report that I just talked about, the Arkansas School Safety Commission final report. It has the grant priorities listed in that commissioner memo as well. The top 5 priorities that the department would like to see you spend that money on is electronic access for high-use exterior doors, a visitor management system, covers over vision panels on classroom doors that lock from the inside but are still able to be unlocked by authorized personnel from the outside, and interior classroom numbers being placed on the corresponding exterior of the building, so if first responders show up to a report of an active shooter in room 7, they can see where on the exterior of the building room 7 actually is. So on to LEARNS Act. Section 8 of the LEARNS Act requires DESE to work with various organizations to promote school safety and to make crisis response training available to school personnel statewide. It is also required to ensure that all districts and charters receive that training in a timely manner. Section 8 goes on to amend the language from requiring school safety audits. They simply changed that to school safety assessments. It adds medical professionals and fire department to the emergency management officials that districts are supposed to collaborate with in compiling their emergency operation plan. It adds cyberbullying and human trafficking to the list of topics that the Arkansas Center for School Safety is supposed to address in its training to assist schools. It requires districts and charters to have a school safety expert review and advise on architectural plans prior to construction. It also requires facilities and transportation to promulgate rules establishing the requirements for what they consider to be a school safety expert. Section 16 of the LEARNS Act deals with child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention. It requires DESE to enhance or adapt curriculum materials to assist public school personnel in providing instruction through a multidisciplinary approach on the detection, intervention, prevention, and treatment of child sexual abuse and human trafficking. The curriculum materials are required to be geared towards a sequential program of instruction from kindergarten through grade 12. It's supposed to include strategies for utilizing that curriculum in schools, and it's also to ensure that the curriculum materials developed are incorporated into the health and safety and phys ed standards developed by the department in an age-appropriate manner. That was the requirements from the department. The requirements for each district and open enrollment charter school, they're required to implement that child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention program that meets those standards set out by the department. It is also required to provide training for teachers employed by the district or open enrollment public charter schools on child sexual abuse and assault and human trafficking. Cover the topics of awareness, reporting requirements, and prevention. Section 16 requires each district or open enrollment charter school to notify the parents of students when that child sexual abuse and assault and human trafficking prevention curriculum is to be taught at the district or charter. It also requires the district to allow parents of the students to review that curriculum before classroom instruction. It also allows parents of students to exempt their child from sitting in on that curriculum. So, age appropriate. The LEARNS Act says before 5th grade, a public school teacher shall not provide classroom instruction on sexually explicit materials, sexual reproduction, sexual intercourse, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Section 23 of the LEARNS Act covers a few changes concerning mandatory reporting of disqualifying offenses. It requires a superintendent of a school district or a charter to report to the state board the names of any person holding a license and currently employed by the district or charter or employed during the previous 2 school years who has been arrested or charged with a felony or any misdemeanor listed in 617-410. I'm sure you're aware of that list of disqualifying offenses. For licensed personnel, there's 49 different offenses. Anything from what you would consider normal would be murder, rape, manslaughter, and it goes on to list several others, including a felony violation of an order of protection. A state board can take action upon notification of a person being convicted of that with a finding of guilt by a court, a plea of no contest or guilty by the school employee, or a true report in the Child Maltreatment Central Registry. It requires DESE to indicate in its licensure system upon receipt of that information that that person's employment eligibility is pending or under further review. It also requires DESE to update that once that case has been resolved. So that was for licensed personnel. The LEARNS Act tracks pretty close to the same thing for unlicensed personnel. The biggest difference between those two is that for non-licensed personnel, it provides the opportunity for the applicant to seek a waiver from that disqualifying offense. A part of the waiver process is that when employment is refused or an employee has been fired, the board is required to notify that person of their decision. It's also required to notify that person that they have the right to seek a waiver from the local school board. The local school board can consider circumstances surrounding the incident, the age of the incident, the age of the applicant when the incident occurred, how long ago that incident occurred, character references. If the board decides to grant that waiver, they have to do so by a written resolution, and upon granting that waiver, they have to immediately submit a copy of that resolution to the department. The hearing over that waiver could be a personnel matter and taken care of in executive session. The legislature was mindful of that and wanted this process to be as open and transparent as possible, and they require that that hearing be done in a public meeting and not in executive session. Section 25 of the LEARNS Act requires a superintendent to notify the state board within 24 hours of a ethics complaint being filed against an educator. It also requires DESE to update its website and notify the public that this person has a pending ethics complaint, and also update that website whenever the ethics violation is brought to resolution. So registered volunteers, the LEARNS Act basically requires all of the same reporting requirements for licensed and non-licensed personnel. Requires those same things, criminal background checks and the like, for registered volunteers as well.